Workers leave the workplace at the end of the day with enough money to buy their means of subsistence. This means that over the course of their working day, they've created enough value to reproduce themselves. Thus, the working class reproduces itself each day. At the end of the day, the capitalist finds him or herself holding a wad of profit, and this profit comes to him or her merely because they own capital, not because they've created any value. It's the surplus labor of the working class which produces the capitalist's profit. Thus, the worker reproduces the capitalist and capital each day as well. And this is the true and ugly nature of capitalist alienation. It's not just that we are dominated by blind, impersonal market forces that we can't control. It's that the blind, impersonal world of capital is something that we produce and continue to produce every day. The workplace is the site of our own domination of ourselves, a domination we reproduce every time we punch in and begin our work. Yet we don't see this as the result of social relations between people in the workplace. Instead, the powers of capital seem to spring from the market itself. Moreover, the market appears as the realm of individual freedom. It appears to be just isolated individuals making free and equal, fleeting exchanges, free from any wider social relation. From this world of bourgeois freedom springs a conception of the world which becomes our ideology, an ideology where freedom means buying and selling things, and where the individual's right to buy and consume is sacrosanct. Rather than being externally imposed, this ideology grows out of the very core of the market itself. This focus on the market takes our gaze away from the workplace, where the domination of capital is less obscured. The workplace is clearly a meeting between the propertied and the propertyless. A worker doesn't exercise unrestrained freedom in the workplace. His labor belongs to the capitalist, who may use it any way he chooses, and he chooses to use it in the most productive way possible. So why then is the workplace not more of a site of all-out class war? Surely we have a long history of militant labor activity in the capitalist world. But we also have a long history of consent to the domination of capital over labor in the workplace. So we must ask, how is this consent manufactured? The manufacture of consent in the workplace is very similar to the way we saw consent produced in the marketplace. Behind any relation of power must ultimately lie a coercive and possibly violent power. The capitalist class owns the means of production and has a vast legal apparatus to back up its claim to the fruits of the working class. But in addition to this coercive threat of violence, exists a world of appearance generated by the phenomena of choice. We saw that in the market our freedom lay in our ability to choose between different types of commodities to buy and different capitalists sell ourselves to. We are free to choose the specific content of our consuming and working, but we are not free to choose our way out of the form of commodity exchange or wage labor. We saw that this is a choice over content, not form. In the workplace, we also see domination masked by a world of appearance, appearances generated by the same logic of choice. If the factory was a site of total domination of the worker, if scientific managers like Frederick Taylor had really gotten their way and created a workplace of total domination, then the antagonisms of capitalism would be much more apparent, and we would probably have a much more radical working class. But workers always maintain some degree of autonomy in the workplace. The choices they make as they navigate their way through the working day create a world of apparent freedoms that mask the social relations behind them. Marxist sociologist and writer Michael Burawoy saw this very thing when he worked in a machine shop in the 1970s. Burawoy noticed that the workers in his shop didn't direct their energy toward resisting exploitation. Instead, they turned their work into a game they played all day, every day, trying to maximize their pay and beat the system. Burawoy's shop was a piece rate shop, which meant that the men were paid more if they produced above quota. Of course, if the men produced too much over quota, the quota was raised. So there was a game to trying to produce as much as possible in order to maximize pay, while not producing so much that the quota was raised. The game was made interesting because workers were given different jobs each day. Each day was a challenge to try to get the best job for the man who handed out jobs. Argue with the man about what was the right quota, get the right parts from the guy who gave out parts, follow the instructions right, make the machines work, etc., etc. A worker's day was entirely consumed with trying to navigate the complex hierarchies among workers, master the machines, pace one's work just right. They called it making out. When Bourgeois met other workers in the shop, the question was always, "Are you making out?" which meant, "Are you beating the quota?" In a world of deprivation or domination, relative satisfactions can be quite compelling. In a world in which we are deprived of our ownership of our own labor, we must occupy ourselves with lesser pleasures. In Bourgeois' machine shop, it was this constant battle to beat the quota that gave workers a sense of purpose and excitement throughout the day. It transformed a boring, repetitive job into one in which workers could exercise creativity, skill, and a sense of relative autonomy. These small freedoms created a world of appearance in which the real antagonism between labor and capital was transposed into a complex, shifting social hierarchy among workers in a fight against the machines. And doesn't this happen whenever we play a game? When we play a game, we must consent to the rules of the game. When we play chess, for instance, we don't question why a pawn can't move backward. If we did, we would never win the game. When we work, we play a game. It may not be a game to make out under a piece rate system like in Bourgeois' shop, but it's a game to survive yet another working day, to make out as best as we can against all the obstacles we may confront. We all have our strategies. We all have a secret formula we try to follow to make it through each day. This world of autonomy that we carve for ourselves is the way we survive the work day. But in playing this game, we focus on relative satisfaction. The game becomes an end in itself. We begin to think of work as a place where individuals exercise freedoms in their attempt to maximize their own personal satisfaction, not a place where one class dominates another. Even in the realm of labor struggles, the logic of the game continues. Unions play a game to grow the union, and this game implies consent to the rules of the game. If unions were to ever threaten the end of capital, they would also threaten themselves. For how can we have a union without a capitalist? Once established, unions often become the method by which individual worker grievances are addressed, or by which individual workers are punished for breaking the rules. The concept of a collective assault upon capital becomes replaced by the concept of the union as a regulator of class relations. The union becomes the equivalent of an internal state which regulates the capital-labor relationship, reducing it to a matter of individual grievances, redirecting collective power into the concerns of individuals, keeping tensions from disrupting work, and guarding the status quo of the rules of the game. The logic of the game, of relative satisfaction from a narrow range of choices, extends to much of our life in a capitalist society. When we comparison shop for the most affordable apartment to rent, we forget that the landlord-tenant relationship is purely exploitative. When we engage in electoral politics, we allow two nearly identical political parties to define the political spectrum. This is one of the trickiest things about bourgeois society. We all have no choice but to navigate our way through a capitalist world of choices, trying to do the best we can. But as we do so, we create a world of appearances, appearances that distort and hide all of the class relations around us. The 21st century presents many opportunities for the left, but there's also a lot of theoretical work to be done. As we comb through the long history of the 20th century, examining the failures and successes of the left, we should be paying attention to what games were being played, what tacit rules were being obeyed. The labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the feminist movement, how were their successes limited by the limits of the game? And as we think about the creation of future movements, how do we confront the enormity and power of bourgeois ideology, an ideology that grows organically out of the basic structure of markets and work? Where are the cracks in this ideology, and how do we best exploit those cracks?